A lot of messaging has gone out from India 37 days into the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia's foreign minister, Sergey Lavrov, Putin's man who's been doing much of the talking during the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, is currently in India. He has spent the day meeting first India's external affairs minister, his counterpart, and then Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The meeting comes at a time when the world is holding its breath over the Russia-Ukraine war. Our next report tells you how Lavrov's visit to India has irked the West and why the US has cautioned India against trade deals with Russia.
As the Ukraine war rumbles destructively into its second month, one of Russia's oldest allies, India, has been a constant geopolitical spotlight. What role will India play? Can't India leverage its friendship with Russia to stop the war? Why is India going soft on Putin's invasion? Is India alleviating the impact of Western sanctions on Moscow? Has India aligned itself in a deeply polarized world since Putin's tanks rolled into Ukraine? If there's ever been a week that underscores India's primacy in the order of things, it is this one. Three top politicians spanning the dramatic divide have descended at the same time in Delhi, each one amplifying an independent relationship but also pushing some sensitive buttons. It began with US Deputy National Security Advisor Dalip Singh, who made the seemingly callous, intemperate remark lecturing India on how Russia wouldn't step in if China escalated operations at the border. A remark that has been widely derided, including by India's former ambassador to the UN, who labelled it as coercion.
Mr. Dalip Singh has joined the ranks of Mr. Preet Bharara in terms of being one of those persons of Indian origin who takes a dig and successfully tries to rattle India at every opportunity. Who is USA to impose sanctions or consequences on other countries? That right, if at all it is a right, belongs to the United Nations.
The abrasive and much derided quip from Biden's man was clearly to try and attack India's relationship with Russia, underscored today by the arrival of Sergey Lavrov, Putin's very vocal foreign minister, and the man doing much of the talking over the Ukraine invasion.
Indian foreign policy is characterized by independence and the concentration on real national legitimate interests. The same policy basis exists in the Russian Federation, and this makes us, as big countries, good friends and old partners.
India's external affairs minister has previously also hit back at suggestions that India was making missteps by dealing with the belligerent sanctions-hit Russia over oil and gas post the invasion of Ukraine.
What we are seeking to do, whether it is in the context of India or other partners and allies around the world, is to do all we can to see to it that the international community is speaking in unison, speaking loudly against this unjustified, unprovoked, premeditated aggression, calling for an end to the violence.
India, as you are aware, has always been in favor of resolving differences and disputes through dialogue and diplomacy. In our meeting today, we will have an opportunity to discuss contemporary issues and concerns in some detail.
Another player arriving in India fresh from the smoking chessboard of Ukraine was UK's Foreign Secretary, who has voiced apprehensions about India's role but played safe.
We respect other countries' decisions about the issues that they face. India is a sovereign nation. I'm not going to tell India what to do.
The month gone by has also been riddled with condescending commentary from Western think tanks pronouncing India's abdication of strategic duty during the current war. Words that have been responded with contempt by Indian analysts. The truth is, India is a close friend of Russia and has a deepening relationship with the US too. So has the week gone by perhaps highlighted above all that India follows its own foreign policy path and won't be influenced. Bureau Report, India Today.
what the United States has said, what Russia has said, and what has basically been a very, very tense and pacey 48 hours as far as India's diplomatic engagements with the big powers of the world is concerned. Joining me also now to take this discussion forward, we have with us Ambassador Ajay Malhotra, former Ambassador of India to Russia. Aman Thakkar is Adjunct Fellow at the Wadhwani Chair in the US-India Policy Studies in Washington. We have with us also Marina Kortunova. She's a journalist and senior commentator from Moscow. But I'd like to start with Craig Kafura. He's Assistant Director for Public Opinion and Foreign Policy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. First of all, welcome to all of you. Craig, I'd like to kick it off with you. Big 48 hours here in India. You've had the US Deputy National Security Advisor who was here. He made some remarks which haven't gone down too well in terms of the tone in which they were delivered, with some sections of government as well as analysts here. You've had Minister Lavrov of Russia here as well. There is a sense that India is walking a tense diplomatic tightrope, but has held pretty steady. How do you read what's happened, vis-a-vis India in the last 48 hours, Craig?
Oh, thank you for having me on. I think this has been a bit of a stumble for the U.S. In this most recent visit. Victoria Nuland's visit just a couple of weeks ago, you didn't have negative headlines coming out of that. This sort of kept the relationship moving forward. And I think the way that Nuland approached her meetings and her public appearances was much more consistent with U.S. policy and the U.S.-India relationship. She talked about potential U.S. assistance to India, expressed a clear understanding of the historic relationship between Russia and India. Yeah. And those are things that we didn't really see in this most recent visit. This is certainly not the kind of headlines that the Biden administration wanted coming out of this most recent visit by Deputy Assistant Secretary Singh. I also think that it's going to now take a bit more work in 2 weeks' time when the U.S. and India have their 2+2 between the External Affairs and Defense Ministers of India and the Secretary of State and Defense Secretary of the United States. That does mean there'll be an opportunity for the U.S. to potentially smooth over feathers that have been ruffled, to clarify statements, to clarify U.S. policy, to express a better understanding of India's role in these relationships. But this is not really how the United States wanted this visit to end.
Very, very true. I mean, the negative headlines, the sense of discontent, a sense of shock in some respects that, a relationship that has been on the upswing near steadily for so many years has someone swoop in at a very sensitive time like this and, seem to be practically lecturing India with a certain amount of condescension, a splash of warning tone also, thrown in. Marina, how do you see that? India hasn't taken too well to the comments by the US Deputy National Security Advisor. It was awkward. The last 48 hours have been awkward because he did it right, before the foreign minister of your country was here shaking hands with our leadership.
Well, first of all, I appreciate previous speakers in favor of appreciating Russian-Indian relations. First of all, a big thanks. And I believe the two countries will continue to actively trade in arms and energy. From Russia, India receives modern weapons at the best prices. And secondly, India is dependent on energy imports, which makes the prospect of Russia selling oil to India at low prices extremely attractive. And you have to understand our historical big sympathy and love to India since Soviet times and even earlier. So at the same time, trade relations between New Delhi and Moscow are unlikely to go beyond these two things in the near future. This is my personal opinion, which is very sad for us Russians, as we want to see more Indian products on our market, pharmacy, food. And I'm telling you, like a simple citizen of Russian Federation, we want to see more India inside Russia. And one of the reasons for this is the pressure on India from quadrilateral security dialogue allies and a number of Western countries, of course, that are extremely dissatisfied with Delhi's neutral position on Ukraine. So, as you know, Joe Biden recently said that India's position on the issue of Indo-Russian relations is somewhat shaky. This definitely puts diplomatic pressure on India to condemn Russia's actions, since the United States is extremely important for India's strategic calculations.
Yes,
and the United States put pressure on India also because otherwise leniency can undermine America's global image, which has already suffered somewhat after the defeat in Afghanistan and what happened in Ukraine. So Sergey Lavrov's trip to Delhi coincided with the visits of the head of the British Foreign Ministry, Liz Truss, and the Deputy National Security Advisor of the United States in charge of international economy, Dalip Singh. And as the latter noted, during the meetings in Delhi, he intended to talk with the Indians primarily on the topic of Ukraine. It is clear that this topic did not sound from the lips of American and British diplomats in a complimentary way for Russia.
No, not at all. It didn't go down well at all. In fact, Ambassador Malhotra, I'd like to get your wisdom on this. In fact, there are ruffled feathers which will need to be sort of repaired or healed, as Craig also mentioned just now. But strangely, just a day after the Deputy National Security Advisor of the United States said that the US wouldn't like to see India accelerate its imports of oil and other things from Russia. You had India's finance minister today announce that we are going ahead and buying oil from Russia, and in fact we've placed orders for 3 to 4 days worth of oil from Russia. As a senior diplomat, someone who's worked in Russia, been ambassador to Russia, how challenging is it going to be to unruffle these feathers, as it were? Or is it not really a big deal in the larger scheme of things?
Well, all things can be solved.
Marina, that was for Ambassador Malhotra. I'll come back to you.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, let me start with commenting on the US Deputy NSA's.
Yes, please.
What he said in public, actually, because it has come out in the press and the media. And to talk about consequences for India, it's absolutely inappropriate. I would say bordering on the inexcusable. He should have been far more circumspect. Publicly threatening and trying to browbeat India is exactly the wrong way to proceed. And it has generated pushback, as you can see. Many of my colleagues have put out tweets out there, etc. And Indians will rally around, and it will strengthen our national resolve to stand up to such petty bullying, especially over sanctions. And we must not forget that these are US sanctions. They are unilateral. They're not UN mandated. And indeed, they're not in consonance with international law. So US can go ahead and implement them, but to expect everyone to fall in line, if you want to convey that message, you have to do so private and in a conversation that is kept between us, normally done. That having been said, let me add that I do feel that it's the gentleman's inexperience that might have led up to this. And since we have the 2+2 dialogue coming up fairly soon, I'm sure that this issue will soon get behind us, because I do not believe it reflects a public desire by USA to show as of a, and as you know, in India, a foreign hand is always viewed very suspiciously. So I don't think this is a US desire to show that, we are bullying or pushing India or trying to browbeat it in any way. So I think this will pass, but absolutely unacceptable. And I do, I do believe that the Americans are a little embarrassed, as the first speaker said.
Yeah,
I think they've understood that this is unfortunate.
Okay,
but it's
very important point you're making, Ambassador. You're saying that you don't think it's reflective of the sentiment in the Biden administration. You're putting it down to possible inexperience by Deputy National Security Advisor Dalip Singh. If I could just get Aman Thakkar, you wanted to complete your point? Please.
Can I just clarify that?
Yeah, please.
Can I just clarify that? Yeah. What I meant was, I don't think that the Americans wanted it to come out in public. They would surely have liked to convey this to us in private. Right. Unfortunately, it has been done through a press meet, and that is not the best way to go ahead.
Oh, it's pushed. Okay, understood. It's pushed all the wrong buttons, and now, there's a lot of damage control to be done at a very sensitive time when, India's role is being looked at closely. Aman, how do you read what happened and what kind of firefighting will be necessary? Because, it's not something to be simply pushed, brushed under the carpet. The headlines have all been screaming, and they've pushed back aggressively against the words of the deputy NSA.
Yeah, I think, as Craig and others have said so far, that the statements weren't helpful. I think in now dealing with India for about 20 years, U.S. policymakers on both sides should have recognized how statements like this can be interpreted and, how India would consume those kinds of statements. So I think that was not ideal for U.S. diplomacy. But I think these issues, as, we've brought up, defense trade, energy trade, and the resultant impact on Indian national interest is something that will supersede, I think, the individual conversations and headlines that happen.
Yeah.
And as we look to the 2+2, as we look to continuing diplomatic engagements, I think the U.S. administration and India will continue to discuss ways in which they can align or come to some sort of common agreement. The United States isn't just dealing with, one country that has a deep trading relationship on energy with Russia. It's got to deal with European partners who are going to continue trading on oil. They see their energy security as being tied.
Exactly.
There have been statements by, the Norwegian leadership, by, other sort of Nordic countries that say that the war is not going to end just because we stop trading on oil. And so I think the United States will continue to engage diplomatically with India and with other European countries and find a common ground. And I think that will be the test of the enduring strategic partnership between these two countries, is the ongoing diplomacy and how we continue to get, Indian national interest and U.S. national interest, which may be a little bit apart as, we look at, a month or 2 months into this invasion coming, I think, closer and closer, not browbeating or bullying or, pointingly telling what another country's national interest is, but recognizing what the national interest is of another partner and coming to a joint agreement. And I think the Biden administration, the U.S. administration, and India are committed towards finding that common ground.
I want to, within just the context of what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, Craig, I want to pull you into this. What is that common ground? As far as oil, if we narrow it down to the comments of the deputy NSA, it was about the payment mechanisms, it was about oil, it was about defense imports. My question is, India's pretty much made it clear that they're going ahead to and getting Russian oil. The defense imports are not going to stop. The rupee-ruble mechanisms are being worked out and possibly expanded as well. So what kind of common ground do you think actually exists and is going to be targeted as part of this US-India diplomatic engagement, Craig?
Well, I think there are, India certainly does import oil and energy from Russia. It's not exactly India's primary source of oil or energy, right? India depends mostly on oil from the Middle East. Even more from the United States than from Russia. Russia constitutes a fairly small portion of Indian imports.
Very small percentage, yes.
So while it is an issue, it's not an overwhelming issue in the way that it is for many of America's allies in Europe. There Russia is the key energy importer or source. And so while it is an issue, and I'm sure that it is of concern to some policymakers in DC, I don't think it's going to be a major obstacle for U.S.-India cooperation moving forward. The same, frankly, goes for defense exports. When Nuland was in India recently, she mentioned that just as the United States is looking to help Ukraine acquire sort of Russian-sourced spare parts, Russian-sourced systems that it's familiar with, that the U.S. might be interested in doing the same for India in the same way, sourcing those supplies from partners in Europe who have stockpiles, who have their own production facilities. So there is, I think, an opportunity for the U.S. to assist India in ways that don't necessarily go against either country's national interests. And I also think that, frankly, the fact that India does have a relationship with Russia may be helpful down the line. We've seen the Indian government speak with the Russian government, with the Ukrainian government. It has relationships with both countries that it thinks are important. It's certainly useful for the U.S. to have a close friend who also has those kinds of relationships at a time of crisis in Europe.
Okay, so there are opportunities that you've identified, Craig. I want to play out just for a moment, what the Russian foreign minister said right after or during, those delegation level engagements with his Indian counterpart. Just listen to what Minister Sergey Lavrov said.
Our Western colleagues would like to reduce any meaningful international issue to the crisis in Ukraine. You know our position. We do not hide anything, and we appreciate that India is taking this situation in the entirety of facts, not just in a one-sided way. Indian foreign policy is characterized by independence and the concentration on real national legitimate interests. The same policy basis exists in the Russian Federation, and this makes us, as big countries, good friends and old partners, an important part of the international relations. We always respect each other's interest.
Day 37 of the war, Marina, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia is in India. High-level engagement, meets with the Indian Prime Minister as well. Is there, obviously Russia is also aware that, India has a relationship with the United States that is on an upswing. At a time when Russia, has been isolated by the world, is this a worry, India's relationship with the United States, in the context of Russia facing all these sanctions, and all this isolation from the rest of the world? Marina.
Well, of course, we are aware of India's relations with the United States and whatever, but here in Russia, we see India as our friend and partner who was, is, and will ever be. For your understanding, Russia is a long-standing and time-tested partner of India. Since the signing of a declaration on strategic partnership between India and Russia 22 years ago, relations between India and Russia have reached a qualitatively new level, characterized by the development of cooperation in almost all areas of bilateral relations, including politics, security, defense, trade, economics, science, technology, and culture. Strategic partnership is carried out by several institutional mechanisms of dialogue, both at the political and official levels, to ensure regular interaction and monitoring of cooperation activities. I remember that during the visit of Russian President to India in December 2010, the status of strategic relationship and partnership between India and Russia was raised to a particular privileged strategic partnership. As for sanctions you mentioned here, so sanctions imposed by Western countries against Russia could lead to fragmentation of the global financial system, of course, and to dilute the US dollar. What is our president doing now? He's diluting the US dollar dominance in it as radical restrictive measures imposed by Western countries after the launch of Russia's special operation in Ukraine. And it may contribute to the emergence of small currency blocks based on trade between certain groups of states.
I hear what you're saying, Marina. I want to bring Ambassador Malhotra in on a very specific issue, which is, these expectations that are there, Ambassador, from India. In today's engagement between the Russian foreign minister with the Indian leadership, twice India has said, look, even though India has abstained, India has a neutral position as far as the war is concerned. They've said that, we are not for military operations. The war must end. Hostilities must cease as quickly as possible. There needs to be diplomacy and dialogue. Do you see a role? I know it's difficult for individual nations, to have major roles. But do you see a role, sir, for India going forward in this war?
Well, we already have a role in the sense that if you see the level and the number of foreign dignitaries who are coming to India and wanting to catch our ear or share a assessment with us, we are already a player in this game. And I think we can exercise some influence both on Russia and on USA. The Russians also need us. They are our friends, but they also need us at this moment. Same with the Americans. I mean, when they look to later on to confront China, they cannot forget that without India on their side, it would be a little complicated and difficult for them to do that. So we are increasingly a player, and as our economy grows and we continue to prosper and move up the ladder, I think we will be even more so. And yes, maybe we are not looking to play a game where we serve as a intermediary or try and arrange proximity talks or anything like that, because that is going on side by side. Today, there would have been already a round of Ukraine-Russia talks. But what we're pointing out is it's time to stop hostilities. In all these cases, you have to bring hostilities to an end. And then you come to, safe passage for civilians, a ceasefire package, withdrawal of heavy artillery, exchange of prisoners, etc., and all of that starts. And then you look at what else needs to be done. And up here, if you see, both countries, Russia and Ukraine, are asking for security guarantees. And both of them now want written and legally binding security guarantees, which shows that something needs to be done. And many countries in Europe are also going down that direction. You see, Switzerland has changed its position. Sweden and Finland have changed their positions. So it might be time that we try and comprehensively address this issue of security concerns in Europe, which also has an impact beyond Europe into Asia. Compared to last time sanctions, for example, Republic of Korea joined the Americans on sanctions this time. So there are changes taking place. India is an important country, a G20 member and a aspirant for Security Council permanent membership, certainly has a role to play. And it would be, not very sensible of us to kind of step back altogether and say, well, let them sort it out. To encourage stopping hostilities is absolutely the right thing to do. And I think it'll head towards that as soon as the situation on the ground sorts itself out from the view of the two countries involved, Russia and Ukraine.
India appears to have forged its own path. It's a message to many as well. It's a story and a situation across the world that's unfolding, across many different layers and aspects. It's difficult to compartmentalize what's happening because things are changing so rapidly, but a very, very interesting story as it unfolds. And we will continue to get you the best voices like we just have here on the Newstrack to try and make sense of the biggest story in the world at this time. Thank you to all of you for joining me here on Newstrack. Thank you so much.
Thank you.